The Zenith Biogenetics campus sprawled across the outskirts of the city like a vision from the future. Its sleek glass towers shimmered under an overcast sky, reflecting the faint, distorted forms of clouds above. Visitors moved through the automated entrance gates, dwarfed by the minimalist architecture and the ominous slogan etched in the stone arch. "Tomorrow starts today." Alex and Danielle Miller parked their modest sedan in the massive lot and sat in silence. The only sounds were the distant hum of a drone overhead and the occasional sharp tap of Alex's nervous thumb on the steering wheel. "You ready for this?" he asked, breaking the silence. Danielle adjusted her scarf and exhaled slowly. "I think so. I mean, we've read the brochures, watched the testimonials. If half of it's true, Alex," she trailed off, staring out at the glass towers. Alex nodded, though his grip tightened on the wheel. "This isn't just for us. This is for Jacob, for his future." Jacob, their 7-month-old son, had been born premature, his early days marked by anxious nights and invasive monitors. He'd fought hard to survive, but it came at a cost. A weak immune system, persistent respiratory problems, and developmental delays that no doctor could fully explain. It was this desperation, this longing to give their son a fair shot at life, that led them here. They stepped into the main building, greeted by a rush of sterilized air that carried a faint metallic tang. A towering digital wall in the lobby displayed a series of slogans interspersed with calming visuals of forests, oceans, and starry skies. "Evolve beyond limitations. Your DNA refined. Mr. and Mrs. Miller?" A soft, synthetic voice drew their attention to a receptionist with impossibly symmetrical features and a vacant smile. "Dr. Kareem will see you now. Please proceed to room 7 on your left." The couple exchanged a glance before walking down the pristine corridor, the sound of their shoes muffled by the unusually soft flooring. The walls, seamless and reflective, distorted their reflections just enough to be unsettling. Dr. Kareem greeted them with the polished warmth of someone who made life-altering decisions sound routine. He was tall, with silver-streaked hair and a sharp jawline. His presence dominated the sterile office, filled with strange, pulsing bioluminescent plants and unrecognizable medical instruments. "I understand you've reviewed the consent forms and preliminary agreements," he began, gesturing for them to sit. Danielle hesitated before sitting. "We have. It's just," she searched for words. "It's a lot to take in. This isn't just therapy, it's evolution." Dr. Kareem smiled, his teeth unervingly white. "You're not wrong. What we offer here at Zenith isn't merely treatment. It's an opportunity to transcend the biological flaws that have plagued humanity for millennia. Disease, fragility, mortality, we can leave these behind. For you and, most importantly, for Jacob." He tapped on a tablet, and a holographic projection of Jacob's genetic profile appeared. The delicate strands of DNA rotated slowly, glowing with an otherworldly light. "Jacob's current condition," Dr. Kareem continued, "is not an insurmountable obstacle, but it does limit his potential. With our adaptive genetic therapy, we can rewrite those limitations. Imagine a life where he's stronger, healthier, smarter, a life where he isn't defined by the complications of his premature birth." Alex leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the glowing DNA strand. "And you're saying this is safe?" "As safe as any medical procedure," Dr. Kareem replied smoothly. "Our success rate is unparalleled. Over 98% of participants report extraordinary results." "What about the other 2%? Danielle asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Kareem's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "There are always variables, but rest assured, the benefits far outweigh the risks." The couple sat in silence, the weight of their decision pressing down on them. Alex reached over and took Danielle's hand. "We've come this far," he said. "If this gives Jacob a chance at a better life." Danielle closed her eyes, then nodded. "We'll do it." The procedure was a blur. Alex and Danielle were separated and led into separate rooms. Each was strapped to a reclined chair, surrounded by unfamiliar machines that hummed softly, their lights pulsating in hypnotic patterns. Jacob, meanwhile, was taken to a specialized infant care unit. "Relax," a nurse said to Alex as a warm, viscous liquid was injected into his arm. You'll feel a brief sensation of warmth, followed by a sense of clarity. She wasn't wrong. Within moments, Alex felt an indescribable rush, a symphony of energy coursing through his veins. The room sharpened, colors deepened, and he swore he could hear the faintest vibrations of the machinery around him. Danielle's experience was similar. As the serum flowed through her, she felt an overwhelming sense of euphoria, as if her body were shedding years of exhaustion and pain. When it was over, they were reunited in a recovery room where Jacob waited for them in his crib. His cheeks, once pale and sunken, now glowed with health. His eyes, brighter than before, seemed to track their movements with a newfound awareness. "He looks amazing," Danielle whispered, tears streaming down her face. Alex kissed her forehead. "We did the right thing." For 2 weeks, their lives transformed in ways they never could have imagined. Alex and Danielle were sharper, faster, and more focused than ever. Their aches and pains disappeared. Sleep felt optional, yet they never seemed tired. And Jacob thrived. His cries were rare now, replaced by bubbling laughter and coos. His physical milestones accelerated, rolling over, sitting up, and even pulling himself to a stand, all within days of the procedure. Everything felt perfect, until it didn't. 2 weeks after the procedure, the Millers' lives felt like a dream, brighter, richer, and more vibrant than they'd ever known. The morning sunlight streaming through their kitchen window seemed impossibly golden, the aroma of coffee more intoxicating than ever. Alex sat at the table, scrolling through emails with a speed and focus that made his usual morning routine feel antiquated. Danielle stood at the counter, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. Even her voice seemed different, more resonant, more alive. "Jacob's already up," she said, glancing toward the baby monitor. The once incessant static was replaced with a soft, rhythmic humming. "I swear, it's like he doesn't need sleep anymore." Alex chuckled. "Neither do we, apparently. For hours last night, and I feel like I could run a marathon." They laughed, but beneath the surface, a faint unease lingered. Jacob's transformation was undeniable. His pale complexion had been replaced with a healthy, almost luminous glow. His chubby arms reached for toys with uncanny precision, and his laughter carried an odd, harmonic quality that filled the house. But it wasn't just Jacob. Danielle's humming trailed off as she placed her hand on the counter, her gaze fixed on her reflection in the stainless steel toaster. Her skin looked flawless, almost too smooth like porcelain. She leaned closer, her breath fogging the polished surface, and noticed faint, shimmering lines beneath her eyes, like veins, but they pulsed with a faint iridescence. "Alex," she called, her voice trembling slightly. He looked up, concern knitting his brow. "What's wrong?" She hesitated, forcing a smile. "Nothing. Just tired, I guess." Alex grinned. "That's impossible. We're superhuman now, remember?" Danielle nodded, but her hand lingered on her reflection, tracing the faint glow beneath her skin. The first incident, that night, as Alex and Danielle lay in bed, a soft tapping sound echoed through the house. Alex stirred, glancing at the clock. 2:14 a.m. "You hear that?" he whispered. Danielle nodded, her body tense. "Maybe it's Jacob." The tapping grew louder, irregular, like fingernails against glass. It was coming from downstairs. "I'll check it out," Alex said, slipping out of bed. His movements were fluid and effortless, almost unnatural. He didn't notice it yet, but Danielle did, watching him glide to the door. "Be careful," she murmured. Alex grabbed a flashlight and crept downstairs. The tapping grew softer as he descended, as if retreating from him. The air felt heavier, almost charged, like the calm before a thunderstorm. Reaching the living room, he scanned the space with the flashlight beam. Everything seemed normal. The faint hum of the baby monitor carried through the silence, steady and reassuring. Then he saw it. The glass patio door was smeared with tiny handprints, dozens of them, pressed haphazardly against the surface. The prints glowed faintly, a phosphorescent green that made Alex's stomach churn. "Danielle," he called, his voice sharper than intended. She appeared moments later, clutching her robe tightly around her. "What's wrong?" He pointed to the door. "Look." Her breath hitched as she saw the glowing handprints. Did Jacob? That's impossible. He's in his crib." Danielle turned toward the baby monitor, still humming softly. "We should check on him." Alex nodded, his chest tightening. They rushed upstairs, their footsteps muffled by the carpeted stairs. Pushing open the nursery door, they found Jacob standing in his crib, staring directly at them. His eyes, once a warm brown, now shimmered with flecks of green. Danielle froze. "Jacob?" The baby tilted his head, a slow, deliberate movement that felt too calculated for a child his age. Then he smiled, a wide, toothless grin that sent chills down Alex's spine. Did you get out of your crib?" Danielle whispered, her voice breaking. Jacob giggled, but the sound was layered, as though another voice echoed beneath his own. The spiral begins. The next morning, Alex tried to rationalize the events of the night. Maybe they were imagining things, side effects of the procedure, or just exhaustion. He avoided looking at the patio door, where the glowing handprints had vanished by morning. But Danielle couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. While Alex worked in his home office, she stayed with Jacob in the nursery. He was unusually quiet, his bright green eyes tracking her every movement. "Do you want your toys, sweetheart?" she asked, reaching for a stuffed bear. As she handed it to him, his tiny fingers brushed hers. A jolt of static shot through her hand, making her gasp. Jacob giggled again, that layered sound returning. Danielle stared at her hand. The veins beneath her skin pulsed faintly, glowing for just a moment before fading. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What's happening to you?" The baby reached for the stuffed bear, his grip surprisingly strong. Danielle pulled her hand back, her heart pounding. That night, Danielle woke to find Alex sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting up. He didn't look at her. "My hands, they don't feel like mine anymore." Danielle leaned closer, her breath catching. His palms glowed faintly in the dim light, intricate patterns swirling just beneath the surface. "It's the procedure," she said, trying to steady her voice. "It's just adapting." Alex turned to her, his eyes filled with fear. Adapting to what? Neither of them had an answer. The days blurred together, though Alex and Danielle barely noticed. Their new lives demanded a strange kind of adaptation. Alex dove into work with a ferocity that startled his colleagues, landing deal after deal, as if his mind had transcended its human limits. Danielle, meanwhile, stayed home with Jacob, trying to keep up with his extraordinary progress. By the end of the third week, Jacob was walking. Not the unsteady toddle they had expected, but purposeful strides that carried a strange, unchildlike precision. He would pick up his toys, examine them closely, and then discard them as though they no longer interested him. Danielle found herself watching him constantly, unable to shake the feeling that he was observing her in return. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Jacob toddled over to the coffee table. His tiny hands moved quickly, stacking blocks in intricate, almost architectural designs. Danielle frowned as she noticed how perfectly symmetrical his towers were, how deliberately he placed each block. "Look at this," she called to Alex, her voice tinged with unease. Alex glanced up from his laptop, a faint smile spreading across his face. "Smart little guy, huh? Maybe he's going to be an engineer." Danielle forced a smile, but a cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. She tried to convince herself it was normal, just the product of the therapy. That night, she awoke to the sound of whispers. At first, she thought it was Alex talking in his sleep, but the sound didn't come from their bedroom. It came from the baby monitor on her nightstand. She turned toward it, her hand shaking as she reached for the screen. Jacob's crib was empty. Her heart raced as she climbed out of bed, her bare feet silent against the floor. The whispers grew louder as she approached the nursery door. When she pushed it open, she froze. Jacob was standing at the window, his back to her, his small body silhouetted by the faint glow of the streetlights outside. "Jacob," she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned slowly, his head tilting at an odd angle. His green eyes seemed to shimmer in the darkness, catching the light in a way that made her chest tighten. "Mommy," he said, the word clear and deliberate. Danielle stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. Jacob smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that stretched across his tiny face. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. Alex appeared behind her, his voice groggy. "What's going on?" Danielle pointed at Jacob, her hand trembling. "Can you talk?" Alex squinted at their son, his expression caught between awe and confusion. Jacob giggled softly, but the sound wasn't quite right. It was layered like two voices speaking at once. Danielle pulled Alex into the hallway, her voice shaking. "This isn't normal, Alex. None of this is normal. He's just developing faster," Alex said, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's the procedure. It's what we signed up for. Then why does it feel like he's watching us?" Alex couldn't answer. The next morning, Alex locked himself in his office, poring over every document and file Zenith had given them. The more he read, the more unsettled he became. There were references to neural adaptation and extraterrestrial sequences, but the language was dense, filled with jargon designed to obscure its meaning. Hours later, he stumbled upon a folder buried deep in the encrypted files, a series of video logs labeled Project Fulcrum. Alex opened the first video. Dr. Kareem appeared on the screen, standing in a brightly lit lab. Behind him, dozens of capsules lined the walls, each filled with a glowing liquid. Suspended inside were fetuses, their tiny forms twitching as if alive. Day 14 of integration, Dr. Kareem said, his voice calm and clinical. Subject 2398 is progressing as expected. Cellular modification is at 87%. Neural adaptation appears stable, though minor interference has been observed in the host's cognitive functions. Alex's blood ran cold. He clicked through the files, each more horrifying than the last. One video showed a child, no older than Jacob, levitating a small object while a team of scientists observed. Another showed a grown man convulsing on a lab table, his veins glowing faintly as his body contorted into impossible shapes. The final video was dated just a week before their procedure. Dr. Kareem stood alone, his expression grave. Phase 1 is nearly complete. The transmitters are proving to be viable. Humanity's role in the convergence is secure. Hosts like the Millers will ensure a seamless transition. Alex slammed the laptop shut, his heart pounding. He stumbled out of the office, his mind racing. Danielle was in the kitchen, her back to him as she stared out the window. "We need to talk," he said, his voice hoarse. She turned, her face pale. "What's going on?" Alex hesitated, the words catching in his throat. He thought of Jacob's glowing eyes, his unnatural grin, and the haunting words from the video. Transmitters. "It's not just therapy," he said finally. "It's something else. Something we didn't agree to." Danielle's eyes widened, and she took a step back. "What are you saying?" Before Alex could answer, a loud crash echoed from the nursery. They ran upstairs, their hearts pounding. The room was empty except for Jacob, who stood in the center of the floor. His hands were stretched out before him, and around him, pieces of the crib lay scattered like the aftermath of an explosion. Jacob turned to them, his green eyes glowing brighter than ever. "The connection strengthens," he said, his voice layered and resonant. Danielle screamed. Danielle stumbled back against the doorframe, her breath catching in her throat. Alex stood frozen, his eyes locked on Jacob. "What did he just say?" Danielle whispered, her voice trembling. Jacob tilted his head, the faint glow in his eyes casting eerie shadows across the room. "The connection strengthens," he repeated, his voice layered with an echo that seemed to reverberate through the walls. Alex grabbed Danielle's arm and pulled her out of the nursery, slamming the door shut behind them. "What is happening to him?" Danielle cried, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," Alex said, his voice raw. "But we need answers. Now!" Jacob's voice echoed through the door, soft and melodic, speaking in that strange, guttural language they didn't understand. The sound made Danielle's skin crawl. "Do we call someone? A doctor? The police?" Danielle's voice rose in panic. Alex shook his head, his mind racing. "No one will believe us. This isn't normal. This is Zenith." "Then we go back," Danielle said, gripping his arm. "We go to Zenith, and we demand they fix this. They won't help us, Alex said bitterly, thinking of the videos he'd seen. They're not interested in fixing anything. This is what they wanted. Then what do? Alex didn't have an answer. That night, the house grew unbearably quiet. The usual hum of the baby monitor was gone, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against their ears. Alex sat at the dining table, staring at the encrypted files on his laptop. Danielle sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. She hadn't spoken for hours, her face pale and drawn. A sudden noise shattered the stillness, a rhythmic pounding, soft but insistent. Alex and Danielle froze, their eyes meeting. "It's coming from the nursery," Danielle whispered. Alex grabbed a flashlight and motioned for her to stay behind. She hesitated for a moment before following him up the stairs. The pounding grew louder as they approached the nursery. It wasn't frantic or aggressive, just steady like a heartbeat. Alex reached for the doorknob, his hand shaking. He pushed the door open. Jacob was gone. The crib, which had been reduced to rubble earlier, was now perfectly intact, as though it had never been broken. The mobile above it spun slowly, casting warped shadows on the walls. "Well, where is he?" Danielle whispered, stepping into the room. The pounding stopped. Alex swept the flashlight beam across the room. It landed on the closet door. Something was behind it. "Alex," Danielle said, her voice barely audible. He approached the closet slowly, his breath shallow. The air in the room felt heavy, thick, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Alex gripped the closet handle and yanked the door open. Jacob stood inside, his glowing green eyes staring up at him. In his tiny hands, he held a strange device, a crude construction of wires, metal fragments, and unrecognizable components. "What is that?" Alex demanded, his voice shaking. Jacob smiled, his teeth gleaming unnaturally in the dim light. "It's almost ready," he said, his voice chillingly calm. Danielle pulled Alex back, her voice breaking. "We need to leave. We need to leave now." Jacob stepped out of the closet, clutching the device. "You can't leave," he said, his voice layered with that strange, otherworldly echo. "The connection is too strong." They fled the nursery, slamming the door behind them. Alex locked it, though he knew it wouldn't stop whatever Jacob had become. "What did he mean? The connection?" Danielle asked, her voice cracking. "It's Zenith," Alex said. "They didn't just change his DNA, they changed him." "He's not," he stopped, unable to finish the thought. Danielle buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled. "What do? He's our baby, Alex. We can't just leave him." Alex stared at the door, his fists clenched. "If we don't figure this out, we're not going to survive this." "Survive?" Danielle's voice rose. "What are you talking about? Did you see the way he looked at us? He's not just changing. He's planning something." Danielle shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No, you're wrong. He's still our son." Before Alex could respond, the lights in the house flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. From the nursery, Jacob's voice echoed, soft and melodic. "It's ready now." Alex grabbed Danielle's hand, his voice urgent. "We need to go." "But Jacob, we'll come back for him," Alex lied, pulling her toward the stairs. They ran through the house, the faint green glow from the nursery casting eerie shadows along the walls. The front door loomed ahead, their only escape. Just as Alex reached for the doorknob, a deafening crash echoed through the house. The floor trembled beneath them, and a blinding green light erupted from the nursery. Danielle screamed as the light filled the hallway, and the last thing Alex saw before everything went dark was Jacob's silhouette, standing at the top of the stairs, holding the glowing device. "You can't leave," Jacob said, his voice resonating with an unearthly power. The house went silent. Alex woke to the faint hum of electricity and the bitter taste of blood in his mouth. He was lying on the cold hardwood floor of the living room, his head pounding with a relentless ache, blinking against the harsh glare of an overhead light. He tried to piece together what had happened. "Danielle," he croaked, his voice hoarse. A soft sound, a muffled sob, came from the corner of the room. Alex turned his head slowly, wincing at the pain in his neck. Danielle was sitting against the wall, her knees pulled to her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes bloodshot. "Danielle," Alex repeated, dragging himself upright. "Are you okay?" She didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on the doorway leading to the stairs. Alex followed her line of sight. The staircase was bathed in a faint green glow that pulsed like a heartbeat, illuminating the darkened hallway beyond. "He's still up there," Danielle whispered, her voice barely audible. "I heard him talking." Alex's stomach twisted. "To who?" Danielle shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I don't know. It doesn't sound like anyone." The faint, guttural whispers drifted down from the second floor, accompanied by the rhythmic clicking of metal against wood. Alex clenched his fists, his heart pounding. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice firm. Danielle looked at him, her expression hollow. "He won't let us." Alex moved to her side and grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me. Whatever's happening to him, we can't stay here. We'll figure it out, but first we have to go." Danielle stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. They crept toward the front door, their movements slow and deliberate. The green glow from upstairs pulsed brighter, the whispers growing louder with every step. Alex reached for the doorknob, his hand trembling. The moment his fingers touched the cold metal, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. Danielle grabbed his arm. "Alex!" A sound like static filled the air, low and insistent, growing louder until it became a sharp, piercing whine. Alex dropped to his knees, clutching his ears. Danielle screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the noise. Then as suddenly as it started, the static stopped. Alex looked up to see Jacob standing at the top of the stairs. His eyes glowed brighter than ever, casting eerie shadows across his small face. In his hands, he held the strange device, wires and circuits pulsing with an unnatural light. "You don't understand," Jacob said, his voice calm and clear, layered with that inhuman echo. Danielle stumbled backward, her hands covering her mouth. "Jacob, please," she begged. "You can't leave," he continued, descending the stairs slowly. "It's too late." Alex forced himself to stand, his legs shaking. "Jacob, listen to me. Whatever they did to you, we can fix it. We'll go back to Zenith. We'll make them stop." Jacob tilted his head, his expression almost pitying. "They didn't do this." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "What do you mean?" Alex demanded, his voice rising. Jacob's small fingers tightened around the device. The pulsing light grew more intense, casting the room in a sickly green glow. "They're just a bridge. The connection isn't theirs." Danielle collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Alex's mind raced, trying to comprehend what his son was saying. "Jacob," Alex said, stepping forward cautiously. "You're scaring us. Please just put that thing down and we can talk." Jacob's glowing eyes fixed on Alex, unblinking. "You're scared because you still think you're human." Alex froze, the air leaving his lungs. "Well, what are you talking about?" Jacob smiled, his teeth sharp and glinting in the unnatural light. "You'll understand soon." The room began to vibrate, the walls trembling as the green glow intensified. Alex grabbed Danielle's arm and pulled her toward the kitchen. "We have to move," he shouted over the rising hum. Jacob didn't follow. He stood at the base of the stairs, holding the device as the room around him seemed to warp and twist. The furniture shifted, the shadows deepened, and the air grew thick with an oppressive heat. Danielle stumbled as Alex pulled her into the kitchen, slamming the door behind them. "What do we do?" she cried, her voice hysterical. "He's not our son anymore. He's something else." Alex paced the room, his thoughts a chaotic mess. "We can't stay here. Whatever he's doing, we have to stop it." "How?" Danielle demanded. "You saw him. He's not just a child. She couldn't finish the thought. Alex opened a drawer, pulling out a large kitchen knife. His hands shook as he held it, the weight unfamiliar and terrifying. "No," Danielle said, backing away. "You're not serious. What choice do we have?" Alex shouted, his voice breaking. "If we don't stop him, we might not survive this." Danielle stared at him, her eyes wide with horror. "He's still our son." "He's not," Alex said, his voice cold. "Not anymore." The hum outside grew louder, the vibrations shaking the walls. Glasses fell from the counter, shattering on the floor. Alex gripped the knife tighter and moved toward the door. "Stay here," he said, his voice resolute. "Alex?" Danielle grabbed his arm, tears streaming down her face. "You can't." Before she could finish, the door swung open. Jacob stood in the doorway, the device glowing brighter than ever. The air around him rippled, and his green eyes locked onto Alex. "You don't have to fight it," Jacob said, his voice almost soothing. "It's better this way." Alex raised the knife, his heart pounding. "Stay back." Jacob smiled, his expression serene. "It's already done." The green light erupted, consuming everything. The green light swallowed everything. Alex couldn't see the walls, the furniture, or even Danielle, though her screams pierced the air. His body felt weightless, suspended in a void where time had no meaning. Then came the voices. They weren't words but tones, reverberating deep in his mind, bypassing his ears entirely. Each note carried with it an emotion, overwhelming fear, unrelenting sorrow, and a sense of inevitability that rooted Alex in place. He tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, sluggish. His eyes adjusted to the light, revealing Jacob standing just a few feet away, his small figure stark against the swirling green vortex that surrounded them. The device in his hands pulsed rhythmically, its glow synchronizing with the voices in Alex's head. "Stop this," Alex managed, his voice trembling. "Please, Jacob." Jacob tilted his head, his glowing green eyes unblinking. "I'm not doing this, Daddy. It's happening to all of us." The words chilled Alex to his core. He reached out toward his son, but the air felt thick, like wading through molasses. Every movement was a struggle. Danielle's voice rang out from somewhere in the void. "Jacob, where are you?" "I'm here, Mommy," Jacob said, his voice layered with that strange, harmonic resonance. Danielle appeared, stumbling forward as though pulled by an invisible force. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. "What's happening? What is this?" "It's the connection," Jacob said simply. "What connection?" Alex demanded, his voice cracking. "What are you talking about?" Jacob raised the device, the pulsing light intensifying. "We're not alone. We've never been alone." The room began to shift, the green vortex twisting into shapes, visions. Alex and Danielle watched in stunned silence as the air around them filled with images. Glowing structures that pulsed like living organisms, dark skies filled with massive, incomprehensible shapes, and beings made of light and shadow that moved with impossible grace. "They've been waiting," Jacob said, his voice carrying a strange calmness. "Watching. And now we're ready." "No," Danielle whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't real. This can't be real." "It is," Jacob said, his gaze fixed on her. "You're part of it now. We all are." Alex stepped forward, his hands trembling. "Jacob, listen to me. You're still our son. Whatever this is, we can fight it. We can stop it." Jacob's smile was almost pitying. "You don't understand, Daddy. It's not something to fight. It's something to become." The green light surged again, and Alex's knees buckled. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he wasn't in the kitchen anymore. He was somewhere else. Alex stood in a vast, open space that defied logic. The ground beneath him was smooth and reflective, like liquid glass, yet it held his weight. The sky, or whatever passed for it, was a swirling expanse of green and black, filled with faintly glowing shapes that moved in hypnotic patterns. In the distance, massive towers rose, their surfaces alive with veins of light that pulsed in time with the rhythm of the voices in his head. He wasn't alone. Figures moved around him, humanoid but wrong. Their bodies shimmered, translucent and insubstantial, their faces devoid of features. They glided across the reflective ground, their movements synchronized like a flock of birds. Alex felt a hand on his shoulder and spun around to see Danielle. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. "Where are we?" "I don't know," Alex said, his voice barely a whisper. A small figure appeared before them. Jacob. But he wasn't their Jacob anymore. His body seemed to glow from within, his features more defined, yet somehow alien. His eyes were no longer just green, but a swirling vortex of light, endless and consuming. "This is where it begins," Jacob said, his voice echoing in the vastness around them. Danielle grabbed Alex's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "We have to get out of here. We have to wake up." Alex stared at Jacob, his heart breaking. "How do we stop this?" Jacob tilted his head. "You can't stop what you're a part of." "What does that mean?" Danielle shouted, her voice desperate. Jacob stepped closer, the light from his body casting eerie shadows across their faces. "Your DNA isn't yours anymore. It's ours. You're part of the bridge now." The word struck Alex like a physical blow. He stumbled back, his mind racing. "What bridge? What are you talking about?" Jacob's expression softened, almost as though he felt sorry for them. "The bridge between here and there. Between what you are and what you'll become." The glowing figures in the distance began to move closer, their featureless forms radiating an oppressive energy. Danielle clung to Alex, tears streaming down her face. "Alex, do something. Please." The figures stopped just feet away, surrounding them in a perfect circle. Their bodies pulsed with light, their forms shifting and rippling like liquid. Jacob raised the device, his small hand steady. "It's time," he said. Alex lunged forward, desperate to stop him, but the moment his hand touched the device, the world erupted in light. When Alex opened his eyes, he was back in the kitchen. The house was silent, the green glow gone. Danielle lay on the floor beside him, unconscious but breathing. Jacob was nowhere to be seen. "Danielle," Alex croaked, shaking her gently. She stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Alex? What happened?" "I don't know," he said, pulling her into his arms. But he did know. Deep down, he could feel it. The connection was still there. The days that followed were eerily calm, as if the house itself had exhaled and settled into a fragile stillness. Alex and Danielle barely spoke, each consumed by their own spiraling thoughts. The silence felt heavier now, like a presence pressing down on them. Jacob was gone. No sound of his laughter, no tiny footsteps across the nursery floor. His absence should have brought relief after what they'd seen, but instead, it left a void that filled the house with a suffocating dread. Danielle sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the empty chair where Jacob's high chair used to be. Her hand absently traced patterns on the wood as she mumbled to herself. "Danielle," Alex said softly, approaching her. She didn't look up. "I still hear him sometimes." Alex froze, his heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" "In the nursery," she whispered, her voice trembling. "At night. He calls for me." Alex knelt beside her, gripping her hand tightly. "Danielle, listen to me. Whatever's calling you, it's not him. It's not Jacob." Her eyes met his, tears brimming. "But what if it is? What if he's still somewhere?" Alex shook his head, his jaw clenched. "We can't think like that. Zenith did this to us. To him. They knew what they were doing, and we need to stop it before." A loud crash interrupted him, echoing from upstairs. Danielle flinched, her breath catching. "That was the nursery," she whispered. Alex grabbed the nearest object, a heavy metal flashlight, and motioned for Danielle to stay behind. "Wait here," he said. "No," she said firmly, standing. "I'm coming with you." Reluctantly, Alex nodded, and together they crept up the stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and the faint smell of ozone lingered in the hallway. When they reached the nursery, the door was ajar, swinging slightly as if caught in an invisible breeze. Alex pushed it open slowly, his grip tightening on the flashlight. The room was a mess. Toys were scattered across the floor, the crib was overturned, and the walls were streaked with faint green lines, pulsating like veins. Danielle gasped, clutching Alex's arm. "It's spreading," she said, her voice shaking. "What is?" Alex asked, scanning the room. Before she could answer, the faint hum of static filled the air. It grew louder, accompanied by a low, rhythmic thudding that seemed to come from the walls themselves. And then they heard it. "Mommy!" Danielle froze, her face going pale. The word was faint, drawn out, like a whisper carried on the wind. "Jacob," she called, stepping forward. Alex grabbed her arm. No, it's not him. Don't. The walls began to ripple, the green veins spreading like cracks in glass. From the corner of the room, something began to emerge, a dark, shapeless mass that shimmered and pulsed with the same unnatural light. Danielle screamed as the mass twisted and stretched, forming into something vaguely humanoid. Its featureless face turned toward them, and the faint outline of glowing green eyes appeared where Jacob's would have been. "Leave," it said, its voice a guttural echo that reverberated through the room. Alex stepped in front of Danielle, holding the flashlight like a weapon. "What do you want from us?" The figure didn't move, its glowing eyes fixed on Alex. "You are no longer necessary." Alex's blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" The figure tilted its head, a movement eerily reminiscent of Jacob. "The connection is complete. You will not survive the transition." Danielle grabbed Alex's arm, pulling him toward the door. "We have to go," she said, her voice frantic. The figure's head snapped toward her, its eyes flaring brighter. "You cannot run." The green light surged, and the walls trembled violently. Alex pulled Danielle out of the nursery, slamming the door behind them. They stumbled into the living room, both breathing heavily. Alex bolted the front door and turned to Danielle. "We're leaving," he said, grabbing her by the shoulders. "Right now." Danielle nodded, too shaken to argue. They hurried to pack what little they could, wallets, keys, and a few clothes thrown haphazardly into a bag. The house seemed to pulse around them, the green veins spreading along the walls and floor. As they reached the front door, Alex hesitated. "Wait," Danielle said, her voice rising. "What are you doing?" Alex looked back toward the stairs. "What if it follows us? What if it doesn't stop?" "We'll figure it out," she said, grabbing his arm. "But we can't stay here." The sound of footsteps echoed from the upper floor, slow and deliberate. Danielle pulled harder. "Alex, please." He turned back to her, nodding. Together, they threw open the front door and ran into the night. The air outside was crisp and cold, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the house. They didn't stop running until they reached their car, parked at the end of the driveway. Alex fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. When the engine finally roared to life, he threw the car into gear and sped away without looking back. As they drove, Danielle stared out the window, her face pale. "What if it's already inside us?" she asked softly. Alex didn't answer. He couldn't. In the rearview mirror, the house grew smaller, its windows glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. And then, as they turned the corner, the glow disappeared. The Millers drove in silence for hours, the darkness of the countryside pressing in around them. The narrow, winding road was illuminated only by the car's headlights, which cut a pale beam through the night. Alex gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, while Danielle stared blankly out the window. Every so often, she glanced into the side mirror, her heart skipping a beat at imagined flickers of movement in the shadows. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice strained. "Anywhere but there," Alex replied, his voice low and tense. Danielle shook her head. "We can't just drive forever. We need a plan." Alex clenched his jaw, his thoughts racing. "I've been thinking about Zenith. If they created this, whatever this is, they might have a way to stop it." "Stop it?" Danielle turned to him, her eyes wide. "Alex, you saw what Jacob said, what it said. It's bigger than Zenith. They don't care about stopping it. They wanted this." Alex gripped the wheel tighter. "Then we make them care. We force them to fix it." Danielle's lips trembled. "And if they can't?" Alex didn't answer. By the time the sun began to rise, they reached the outskirts of the city where Zenith Biogenetics was located. The sterile, futuristic campus loomed in the distance, its sleek glass towers catching the pale morning light. Alex pulled the car into a quiet lot a few blocks away and killed the engine. "We can't just walk in there," Danielle said, her voice shaking. "They'll turn us away. Or worse." Alex nodded, his mind already working. "We'll figure out a way inside. Maybe there's a back entrance, or—" He stopped mid-sentence as a sharp crack echoed from the woods behind them. Both of them froze, their ears straining. "Did you hear that?" Danielle whispered. Alex nodded, his eyes scanning the treeline. The thick foliage swayed gently in the breeze, but there was no sign of movement. Another crack, closer this time. Danielle grabbed Alex's arm. "It's here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It followed us." Alex grabbed the flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the car, his heart pounding. "Stay here," he said. "No," Danielle said firmly, climbing out after him. "I'm not staying alone." The two of them moved cautiously toward the edge of the lot, the flashlight's beams sweeping across the trees. The morning light was weak, casting long shadows that danced with each gust of wind. Then they saw it. A figure stood just beyond the tree line, partially obscured by the foliage. It was humanoid but wrong, its body shimmering as though it weren't fully solid. Its head tilted toward them, and two faint green lights shone where its eyes should have been. Danielle clutched Alex's arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Is that Jacob?" The figure stepped closer, and Alex took a shaky step back. "It's not him," he said, his voice hollow. The figure raised an arm, and the air seemed to ripple around it. The green glow in its eyes flared, and Alex felt a sudden, sharp pain in his chest, like something was clawing at him from the inside. Danielle screamed, doubling over as she clutched her stomach. "It's in my head," she cried, her voice breaking. "It's in my head." Alex grabbed her, pulling her back toward the car. "We need to move." The figure didn't follow, but its presence lingered, a heavy weight pressing against their minds as they stumbled into the car. Alex started the engine, his hands trembling, and sped away without looking back. By the time they reached Zenith's campus, the pain had subsided, leaving only a dull ache in their chests. The glass towers loomed ahead, their reflective surfaces gleaming in the harsh sunlight. Alex parked in a secluded corner of the visitor's lot and turned to Danielle. "We don't have a choice. We have to go in?" Danielle nodded, her face pale but resolute. They approached the main entrance, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft hiss. Inside, the lobby was eerily quiet, the sterile white floors and walls reflecting the bright overhead lights. A receptionist with perfectly symmetrical features and an unnerving smile greeted them. "Welcome to Zenith Biogenetics. How can I assist you?" "We need to speak to Dr. Kareem," Alex said, his voice firm. The receptionist tilted her head slightly, her smile never faltering. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's urgent," Alex replied, his tone sharp. "Tell him it's about Project Fulcrum." The receptionist's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, a brief flash of recognition. "Please wait here," she said, gesturing to a row of chairs. Alex and Danielle sat, their nerves fraying as the minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, a door opened, and Dr. Kareem emerged, his expression unreadable. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I wasn't expecting to see you again." Alex stood, his fists clenched. "You lied to us. You didn't tell us what this experiment really was." Dr. Kareem's gaze flicked to Danielle, then back to Alex. "I see you've experienced some complications. Why don't we discuss this privately?" He gestured toward the door, and Alex hesitated before following him. Danielle clung to his arm, refusing to be left behind. Dr. Kareem led them into a small, windowless office and closed the door behind them. "You need to tell us how to stop it," Alex demanded. "Whatever this connection is, it's destroying us." Dr. Kareem sat behind his desk, his hands folded neatly. "The connection isn't something you stop," he said calmly. "It's something you embrace." Danielle's breath hitched. "What does that mean?" Dr. Kareem leaned forward, his expression softening. "It means your evolution is inevitable." Alex slammed his fist on the desk. "This isn't evolution. It's a nightmare." Dr. Kareem smiled faintly. "Nightmares often precede awakening." The lights flickered, and Alex felt the familiar hum of static in the air. Danielle grabbed his hand, her grip tight. "It's here," she whispered. Dr. Kareem's smile widened, and his eyes gleamed with a faint green light. It was always here. The green light in Dr. Kareem's eyes grew brighter, casting eerie shadows across the sterile walls of the office. Alex and Danielle recoiled instinctively, their bodies tense with the primal urge to flee. "What do you mean? It was always here." Alex demanded, his voice shaking. Dr. Kareem stood slowly, his movements unnaturally fluid. Humanity was never the pinnacle of evolution. You were always a stepping stone, a vessel designed to carry something greater. The experiment wasn't about fixing flaws. It was about unlocking what was already within you. Danielle's breath hitched. You did this to Jacob. To us. Dr. Kareem's gaze flicked to her, his faint smile never wavering. Jacob was never just your son. He's part of something far more significant. A bridge between your species and the next phase of existence. No, Alex snapped, his fists clenching. You're not turning us into things. We're human. Dr. Kareem tilted his head, his expression almost pitying. You still cling to that word as if it means something. Humanity is a chrysalis. You've already begun to shed it. The room seemed to grow colder, the air heavier. A faint hum filled the space, vibrating deep in Alex's chest. Danielle pressed closer to him, her hands trembling. Tell us how to stop this, Alex said through gritted teeth. Dr. Kareem's smile faltered for the first time. You can't stop what's already in motion. The convergence is inevitable. Fighting it will only bring suffering. Danielle shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You're lying. There has to be a way. Dr. Kareem regarded her for a moment, then sighed. There's only one way to sever the connection, but it comes at a price. What price? Alex demanded. Before Dr. Kareem could answer, the hum intensified, and the walls of the office began to ripple like the surface of a disturbed pond. Green veins spread across the ceiling, pulsating with an unnatural rhythm. It's here, Danielle whispered, clutching Alex's arm. Dr. Kareem turned to face the door, his expression unreadable. You can't run from it anymore. It's time to embrace what you've become. The door burst open, and the same shimmering, humanoid figure that had followed them from the woods stepped inside. Its glowing eyes fixed on Alex and Danielle, and a deep, resonant voice echoed in their minds. The bridge is complete, it said. You cannot resist. Alex moved to shield Danielle, his mind racing. What do you want from us? The figure raised a translucent hand, and Alex felt the weight of its presence pressing against his thoughts. Images flashed through his mind. Alien landscapes, towering structures pulsing with light, and countless beings moving in synchronized harmony. You are the key, the figure said. The first to cross. Danielle screamed, the sound cutting through the oppressive hum. She grabbed a metal paperweight from Dr. Kareem's desk and hurled it at the figure. It passed through its body without resistance, hitting the wall behind it. We're not going anywhere with you, she shouted. The figure stepped closer, the green light from its eyes growing blinding. You already have. The world dissolved around them, and Alex felt himself falling through a vast, endless void. Danielle's hand slipped from his grasp, and he reached for her desperately, but she was already gone. He landed hard on a cold, reflective surface, the impact driving the air from his lungs. Gasping, he pushed himself up and looked around. He was in the same alien expanse he had glimpsed before, a vast, endless plain of liquid glass, with towering structures in the distance. The sky above him was an endless swirl of green and black, filled with faintly glowing shapes that pulsed in time with the rhythmic hum that surrounded him. Danielle lay a few feet away, her body trembling as she struggled to sit up. Danielle! Alex scrambled to her side, pulling her into his arms. What is this place? She whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know, Alex said, his own fear barely contained. A familiar figure appeared before them. Jacob, or what had once been Jacob. His glowing green eyes seemed to pierce through them, and his small frame radiated an aura of overwhelming power. You've crossed the threshold, Jacob said, his voice layered and resonant. This is where it begins. Danielle clung to Alex, tears streaming down her face. Jacob, please, come back to us. We're your parents. Jacob tilted his head, his expression unreadable. You were, but now, you're something more. Alex stood, his fists clenched. We didn't ask for this. We didn't agree to become whatever this is. You didn't need to agree, Jacob replied. It was always meant to happen. The glowing figures from before began to appear, surrounding them in a perfect circle. Their featureless faces turned toward Alex and Danielle, and their presence filled the air with an almost unbearable pressure. Jacob raised his hands, and the ground beneath them began to ripple. The convergence is complete. There's no turning back. Alex lunged toward him, desperation driving his every movement. "I'll stop this." Jacob raised a hand, and Alex froze mid-step, his body immobilized by an unseen force. "You can't stop what you've already become," Jacob said, his voice soft but unyielding. "The bridge is built, and it leads to forever." The figures moved closer, their glowing bodies merging into a single, towering form that loomed over Alex and Danielle. Its eyes burned with an intensity that seared their minds, and its voice echoed like the end of all things. "You are ours now." The light erupted, consuming everything. Alex woke to the smell of coffee. The soft morning light filtered through the blinds, casting a warm glow across the kitchen. For a moment, he felt a profound sense of peace, as if the horrors of the past few weeks had been nothing but a bad dream. Danielle's voice broke the illusion. "Alex, are you coming?" He turned toward the sound and saw her standing by the counter, smiling as she poured a cup of coffee. She looked radiant, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders, her face calm and untroubled. "Danielle," he said, his voice trembling. She frowned slightly, tilting her head. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Alex stood slowly, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Where's Jacob?" Danielle's smile returned. "He's in the nursery, of course. He's been so good this morning. Slept through the night." The word sent a cold shiver down Alex's spine. He rushed past her and down the hall, his heart pounding. The nursery door was open. Inside, the crib stood in its usual place, bathed in soft morning light. Jacob lay on his back, cooing softly as he kicked his legs. "Daddy," Jacob said, his voice clear and innocent. Alex staggered back, his mind reeling. The last thing he remembered was the endless void, the towering figures, the searing light. This wasn't right. "Danielle," he shouted, spinning around. She appeared behind him, concern etched across her face. "What's wrong?" "This isn't real," Alex said, his voice breaking. We were there, in that place, with him." Danielle reached for his arm, her touch gentle. "Alex, you're scaring me. What are you talking about?" Before he could respond, a faint hum filled the air. It was so subtle he might have missed it, but it was there, an almost imperceptible vibration that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Danielle didn't seem to notice. She picked up Jacob, cradling him in her arms. "You're just tired," she said soothingly. "You've been under so much stress. Maybe you need to rest." Alex stared at her, his chest tightening. "Don't you hear that?" "Hear what?" "The hum," Alex said, his voice rising. "It's the same sound as before. It's still here." Danielle's smile faltered. For a split second, her expression seemed off, as though she didn't quite understand the question. "I don't hear anything," she said finally, her tone clipped. Alex backed away, his head spinning. He turned and ran out of the nursery, his bare feet slapping against the floor. The house looked normal, but it didn't feel normal. The walls seemed to press inward, and the hum grew louder, reverberating in his skull. He reached the front door and yanked it open. Outside, the neighborhood stretched before him, perfectly ordinary. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and the world appeared calm. But something was wrong. The street was empty. No cars, no neighbors, no movement. Just a static, lifeless stillness. "Alex," Danielle called from behind him, her voice soft and steady. He turned to see her standing in the doorway, Jacob cradled against her chest. Her eyes glowed faintly green. "You can't leave," she said, her voice layered with that same otherworldly echo. Alex's breath caught in his throat. "Danielle?" She stepped closer, her movements smooth and deliberate. "You don't need to fight this anymore. Everything is as it should be." Jacob turned his head toward Alex, his green eyes shining. "The connection is complete, Daddy." Alex stumbled back, his mind screaming at him to run, but his legs refused to move. The hum rose to a deafening roar, and the world around him began to ripple. The house dissolved, the street vanished, and Alex was falling again, through light, through darkness, through time itself. When he opened his eyes, he was back at the kitchen table. The morning light filtered through the blinds, the smell of coffee wafting through the air. Danielle's voice called to him from the counter. "Alex, are you coming?" His heart sank as he realized where he was. The loop had restarted. This time, he didn't rush to the nursery. He didn't speak. He sat frozen, his hands trembling as the hum began again, faint but growing. He understood now. There was no escape. The bridge was built, and he was part of it forever.